네, 이제 기조 연설 여러분 많은 기대감을 갖고 계실 것 같습니다. 곧바로 소개를 해드릴까 하는데요. 오늘 컨퍼런스는 성별 임금 격차에 대한 포용적 과제라는 공통적 주제를 갖고 있습니다. 이에 총 두 분께서 연사로 나서 주실 텐데요. 첫 번째 연사분께서는 글로벌 금융시장에서 투자 책임자 또 상무이사 등을 역임하시면서 금융 전문가이자 여성 금융인으로서 업력을 쌓아 오신 만큼 또 깊이 있는 통찰, 인사이트를 공유해 주실 것 같습니다. IFC 동북아시아 및 태평양 총괄 크리스티나 옹고마 본부장님 오늘 함께하고 계신데요. 연단으로 모셔보겠습니다. 여러분 큰 박수로 본부장님을 환영해 주시기 바랍니다. 네, 본부장님께 여러분 다시 한번 환영의 박수 보내주십시오.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here and to hear about the work of the Korea Network of Women in Finance and to meet such esteemed colleagues and people in the financial industry. It's a real pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. So when I was preparing for this particular event as a woman in finance, it gave me time to sort of reflect on my own life and my own professional journey as a woman in finance. Today, I manage and oversee IFC's financial services advisory business in East Asia and the Pacific. And some of the work that you saw on the video is work that is overseen by my team and by the industry department in which I work. Getting here to this particular role has been a very rewarding and also very interesting career path. I didn't have a typical path for a career in finance, I think that most women in this room might have. I was actually trained as a lawyer, and I was called to the bar in Ontario in Canada about 25 years ago. So it's a long time. I think I'm dating myself. And when I started my career as a young lawyer, I could never have imagined how interesting and global and diverse my career could have been. This was made possible, I think, primarily through a very highly supportive ecosystem. And that ecosystem included personal relationships, my parents, my extended family, who always told me that there were no limits in terms of what I could achieve. I also had access to good quality education that was affordable, and that was made possible by good government investment policies and education policies in Canada, where I had most of my professional career. I also had extremely supportive supervisors and employers who were truly committed to inclusion. So after being called to the bar, I practiced for about 2 years. I was a financial lawyer, and I worked in structured finance and derivatives. I was a derivatives lawyer, doing a lot of structured finance and securitization work. But as I started my career, I was very interested not only in just doing legal work, and not only in drafting, negotiating legal agreements, but I also wanted to understand a lot more about structuring investment transactions and beginning a career in finance. So early in my career, 2 years only after getting called to the bar, I started to look out for opportunities at investment institutions where I could probably go in-house as a young lawyer to do more investment work that wasn't only just churning documents. And so an opportunity for a junior in-house lawyer came about, and it was at a rating agency in Canada, and it was in the structured finance and securitization industry. And that interview, that opportunity was a complete game changer in my profession and in my career because the hiring manager took a chance on me. And why do I say that? There were a lot more definitely technically adept people, but he definitely saw my interest and my caution, and he said, this is somebody I could probably start out to work with because this is a very technical area of structured finance. It is not just financing, but it's a lot of structuring, a lot of deal hedging, and so on and so forth. And at this time, when I was in this position, diversity and inclusion was hardly ever discussed. This was about 25 years ago. There were no DEI policies in the Canadian market or at Canadian banks. And so it was because of a very proactive hiring manager who saw potential in me that marked the turning point in my career and also my professional life. And looking back, when I tell this hiring manager, who I still speak to so many years later, that he opened so many doors to me, of course, after that first position, he doesn't always appreciate the impact that he had on my life, because he pushed me to think beyond seeing myself only as a lawyer. He also opened up a lot of opportunities for me to move from pure legal work into deal structuring, and indeed, he pushed me to be a better lawyer because of that. Because I understand structuring of the deals and the commercial aspects, it made me a much, much stronger lawyer as well. Many years later, when I talked to him about this first interview, what he says to me is that you were probably the least experienced candidate as far as finance, but you were the most honest and also the most cautious in the interview about what you didn't know. And you were also very candid and eager about what you could bring to the table. You were also very keen and extraordinarily willing to learn. So that one opportunity allowed me to progress into a highly technical second role in my career. I moved to an investment bank in Canada, and I was overseeing the structuring and the provision of lending and trading products for hedge funds in North America and Europe. And this was across all sorts of products, including derivatives and prime brokerage facilities. And it was in this role, where I was doing work with hedge funds, when I was included by a supervisor to co-lead a very large precious metals trading facility with a major hedge fund that had a strategy for that was based on macro. And following the 2008 crisis, that hedge fund was buying a lot of precious metals and physical gold as a hedge to safety. And so I came to the attention of the head of that business, who told me to come over to his business to head the client solutions team. This was also a structuring role. And it was also, again, because I was given the opportunity to work on such an innovative and market-changing transaction that I was able to move on to the precious metals desk and that side of the business. So through my work at that department doing precious metals, plus working on corporate-wide initiatives, stretching myself, I sat on the committee that actually hires trading and sales associates to the bank. I did a lot of D&I work because at that time, this was very important in the financial sector. I then gained a lot of attention from senior management, and this was key when I was applying for a role as a managing director to actually head a desk that oversaw the bank's financial institutions clients. And this was now across products, so I covered the bank's own bank clients and hedge funds and pension funds and insurers across a variety of fixed income and trading and credit products. And it was from this role then I was hired to the IFC in Washington at the headquarters, also covering financial institutions, but focusing on investments in capital markets. So this was a mid-career move for me, wanting to see a lot more in the world. I had seen the world, including in Asia, primarily in my role covering precious metals, but this was an opportunity to really get into the markets that perhaps the banks that I worked at before were not really truly interested in or had a lot less risk appetite from. And so I moved to Washington and I did a little bit of global work before an opportunity came to come right into the region here in Asia, where I had done so much work when I was covering precious metals. And it is from that role in Washington that I took this role here, doing financial services advisory work for the IFC. I just take you through that journey because I do not take this career for granted. I mean, I was a lawyer. I could have been stuck still doing legal work in a law firm. But because I had a very highly supported ecosystem behind me, and it was an engaged ecosystem that really cared about what happened to women leaders in their institutions. And it also helped me grow my own self-confidence. It gave me willingness to step into the unknown, even if I didn't know necessarily the products. Because I had this supportive system behind me, it was easy to move into the next and the next and the next role. So I think you will see, as I go through the slides, there's some elements of this, not only of my journey, but also of the video that went before, what it takes to actually close the pay gap and have inclusive solutions for women. It takes an entire ecosystem, and it takes a lot of commitment from leaders. So thank you once more for this opportunity, and now probably I'll move to the presentation. So I'm pleased to share insights today from our own institutional policies at the IFC on our work, and particularly our efforts to promote gender equality and close the gender pay gap. with inclusive and also what we believe are innovative solutions. As some of you know, IFC is a member of the World Bank Group, and we are the largest global developmental finance institution, and we're focused on the private sector in emerging markets. The World Bank itself focuses on financing, advising governments, but we at IFC, we provide investments and advice to the private sector for both banks and also companies in emerging markets. And our goal is to end poverty on a livable planet using finance. So gender is really central to our mission. Before getting into the main theme of this event, let's consider some startling numbers, some that were shared by speakers who had come before me. And we take these stats from the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report in 2024. And they say that at the current rate of progress, it will take 134 years for the world to reach full parity, which is about 5 generations from now. Secondly, LinkedIn has some data from 2024 that shows a persistent disparity. Women make up only 42% of the global workforce and a mere 31.7% of senior leadership roles. So what we find is that while women are nearly half of entry-level positions, they account for less than a quarter of C-suite roles. This trend for women ascending into leadership has reversed, declining from 37.5% to 36.5% since 2023. Also, despite some progress, women still remain underrepresented in STEM, and they comprise only 28.2% of the STEM workforce compared to 47.3% in non-STEM sectors. And these statistics are simply not acceptable. So there's an urgent call to resource gender equality efforts to avoid the rollback of hard-earned progress and to ensure that pathways to growth, to prosperity, to innovation and sustainability are leveling the ground for all people. The good news is that through collaborative efforts from the private sector and the public sector, including targeted interventions, we can probably make 50-50 a reality. And in this process, we believe the financial sector, particularly banks, insurers, and others in the financial sector have a very unique role to play in accelerating this shift, while unlocking new business and new opportunities for long-term growth. So I'm going to focus on 3 different areas. First, I want to examine the experiences of women in the financial sector across the region. What is really preventing women from taking on leadership roles like the ones that you have today? Second, I'd like to delve into the gender pay gap, particularly in Asia and the Pacific. And what does it mean in practice? How can we address it? When we talk about the gender pay gap, what are we talking about? And then finally, how can we as women working in finance ensure that we uplift all women through better access to financial services, especially the most marginalized and those small business owners who are the lifeline and the lifeblood of our economies. And that's why we actually showed the video before, because those sorts of women and that sector are really key to driving the economy, perhaps not in this particular market, but definitely in many of the markets in which IFC serves. So the good news is that women make up slightly more than half of banking professions globally. And in Asia, this really varies significantly. But as mentioned earlier, women in the financial services sector continue to face significant structural barriers in their full participation, unless, as I said earlier, and according to myself, there is a supportive ecosystem behind them. For instance, we find that in Vietnam, women comprise about 2/3 of employees in the banking sector, yet they hold only 28% of leadership roles. So at IFC, as you see, this issue is particularly important to us, and we have sponsored a wide variety of studies that seek to actually understand these dichotomies and the differences in different markets. These are some of the studies that we have done globally, and they're also available publicly on our websites. So if we move to South Asia, other parts of the region here in Asia are much further behind, such as Sri Lanka, where women occupy about 40% of entry-level roles, but only 27% of middle management and 20% of senior management positions. If we take South Asia as a whole, women's representation in the banking industry is just 30%, significantly lower than the global or the East Asia average. And again, we know from our own research at IFC across financial services in Asia and the Pacific that women's limited representation in senior leadership roles is not as a result of lack of ambition. Absolutely not. We have heard from women themselves that they aspire to senior leadership positions and also board roles within the sector. Rather, we find their advancement is constrained by other factors, some internal within the institutions in which they work, and some coming from household or societal pressures and expectations. So what are the barriers to women's inclusion in finance? So IFC, again, has identified a range of barriers, both to entry and advancement. Some of these, I'm sure, are not new to you. They go from entry and retention, opportunities for growth, and also the workplace environment. So these barriers hinder women's ability to begin or resume work after they take off work to have children, or advance, and they create a perfect storm of inadequate access to professional development opportunities. This prevents women from acquiring the necessary skills and showcasing their leadership potential. And so despite many banks demonstrating the best of intentions to address these barriers that are shown here, there still seems to be a disconnect. We found that there are 3 ingredients, right, that help in some of this progress or creating progress in achieving equity for women. A recent study that we did in South Asia found that progress is being made in some areas, but there are other factors, and these 3 factors are listed here that make this progress possible. So there has to be leadership commitment. That's number 1, and it's probably the most important thing. I think banks need to advance women by setting clear gender targets. They have to decondition biases, and they have to assign accountability across the bank for achieving these goals. There have to be equitable workplaces, and what does that mean? There should be safety and equity, reducing hiring and evaluation biases, and the banks need to ensure that women have the opportunities to demonstrate their skills. And they can only do that by working on really important pieces of work. It goes back to what I had actually explained when I started about being given the opportunity on working on a very, very important, large transaction during the financial crisis. And this was a very innovative transaction that actually allowed me to be seen by others, by other senior members of the institution. Also, what's important are organizations such as this, sponsorship programs, and also promoting a culture that's free from harm and also microaggressions. And then there has to be industry engagement. I mean, we have some regulators here. Regulators, investors, and also industry associations have to create incentives for women's advancement to address policy issues and drive positive change as well. So this, I'm sure you've heard very many times, that women's representation in leadership results in better outcomes. We've heard this over and over again. And what we've seen also is that globally, commercial banks that have about 15% or more women in senior roles command up to 33% higher returns on equity than those with less than 10%. And additionally, banks that have more women in senior risk and audit roles also demonstrate better risk management. I'm sure you've heard about this in very different iterations, but it is also what we find ourselves, and we do very in-depth work with financial institutions. When we provide them financing, when we provide them advisory, and when we put equity into them, we have our own members at the IFC sit on those boards. And so we have seen this in action from when we invest in banks to when those banks become our portfolio companies at the IFC. I'd like to also then cover how IFC looks at these issues, because we can study them and put best practices, but how are we looking at them ourselves? So our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, what we call DEI, is really a central pillar of the IFC and who we are. And to accelerate our journey, what we've done is we've decided to focus on 3 key areas, which is gender equality, data-driven action, and also inclusive leadership. So let's take gender equality first. What we do around gender equality is have a very focused approach to our gender action plan. And this plan has a critical focus on improving the representation of women at senior levels at the IFC, using what we called the Gender Balance Index. And this is a metric that measures gender distribution across 4 grades, from the most junior administrative roles to junior mid-level staff, to senior technical staff, and then to managers. And the senior technical staff are the staffs that do all our structuring, that give advice to clients and so forth. So they are the really core and central to our operations. Our action plan is developed from the economic dividends for gender equality certification results. You may have heard about the EDGE certification, which is really the leading standard for DEI, particularly focused on gender. And in our last certification, which was in financial year 21, our action plan came out and included a real focus and approach on conducting our annual gender pay gap assessments, encouraging men to use paternity or parental leave, and setting gender equality objectives for managers and supervisors. So the action plan also is coupled with, of course, training. And we always continually need training to refresh ourselves on these issues, even when we are women managers. And what does this mean? It's awareness training on potential gender biases, which I believe women can have gender biases as well as men, and it can be also for the same sex. We also have biases to tend to recruit people who are more like us, who sound like us, who have come from a similar background, and who resonate with us. So there's a lot of training around that to actually step outside of that and see the candidate for what the candidate is bringing. As a result of this gender plan, we have made real true progress in the gains of representation of women at our most senior technical and managerial grade groups. And this is really important because younger women coming into the organization actually see examples that they want to emulate if you have more women at the senior levels. This technical and managerial segment is really a combined 70% of our GBI, our Gender Balance Index. And since 2019, the share of women across these grade groups, which is the grade groups that look at technical issues at the IFC and also managers, has risen from 41.1% to 44.2% from 2019 to 2023. And this year, we aim to increase female hires and promotions at the higher technical grade groups. And I have to say to you, as a manager who hires people to my department, I oversee 45 people, I take this extremely seriously. When we are looking at candidates, we have to push our HR client partners to actually bring us more women and to ensure that we're representing women and having women on our panels in a very equitable manner in the same way we do for men. The next thing that we also do is data-driven action. And what does this mean is that we want to talk about gender equality using data. So our approach has been very, very transparent and open, and it has also been transformed with the launch of what we call our dashboard. It's the IFC dashboard. This dashboard puts a wider range of data, including DEI data, into the hands of IFC staff, so they can search and look at the data, and they can look at the data on promotions, progressions, who was hired, the differences between men and women in different roles. And we feel that this is extremely powerful because one of the things that I know as well is having been in a larger institution, in several large institutions, hiring and also doing interviews and hoping for progressions, there is a lot of rumors and a lot of myths that actually go around in the institution. Oh, they've hired so many women in this department, or that manager has a bias towards certain types of women from certain segments. And I think having this data dashboard is really critical because it gives IFC management, our human resources team, the DEI advocates that we have, which I will talk about in a little bit, it helps them to make more informed decisions, and it also empowers staff to closely monitor their progress against others in their cohort, at their level as well, and also in their own departments. So we find that this data-driven accountability builds trust between staff and also management. The last pillar is inclusive leadership. And there are several tools that IFC uses for inclusive leadership. But generally, what we would say is that we want to lead by example to foster inclusion and also belonging. So we launched a communication learning program in financial year 23, and it's about inclusive communication. That's to help us improve engagement with employees, and it is between employees and managers, and both take this course. We also have things like respectful workplace advisors, and they train and support peers to provide confidential support to staff who have concerns or questions about workplace issues. We also have a very, very rigorous inclusive recruitment program. I spoke a little bit about this, but we are focused on inclusion from the job description, the advertisement, our talent outreach, screening, how our panels are actually empaneled to do the interviews, and the assessment of skills as well. Everything is very structured. And what I say is that before I came to the IFC, I had worked in several different organizations in pretty technical roles, some of them. And I have never had a more difficult interview than I had when I tried to join the IFC. And this was for several reasons. IFC is very consensus-driven. And so one person is not empowered to make the decisions for absolutely everybody in the department. But the second thing is that in order to have a true approach to fair hiring, the interviews are extremely technical. And I may have actually stopped doing, purely technical modeling and financial work because, when I became a manager, I'm more about strategy. I had to really go back and learn after my first interview. Oh my goodness, I had forgotten about this. How would I hedge these two currencies? That sort of thing. It was an extremely technical interview. And so just because we have an inclusive recruitment schedule, it does not mean that the interviews are not difficult. Actually, it is even more of the reverse. By the time you come through this 360 interview process, I think you are very, very sure that you want to work at the IFC. So this inclusive recruitment is also underpinned by training and continuous improvement, especially for managers and people supervisors. Then finally, we have our DEI representatives in our country offices. IFC is headquartered in Washington, D.C., but 57% of all our staff are outside of Washington. And DEI issues, even gender issues, I would say, are really instrumental in shaping, DEI in our country offices, and we need to have the local context. The only way we can have that is by having representatives in the field. So we can have our policies and we can create all of these approaches to DEI and gender inclusion at the headquarter level. But if they're not congruent with the reality on the ground, then we have failed. And so our DEI representatives are really instrumental in helping us shape this agenda. So now I will go to the gender pay gap, which we have spoken about earlier. And what is the gender pay gap? The gender pay gap in Asia is a really significant issue because women are earning less than men across various sectors and in different regions. And South Asia sees the greatest average gender pay gap of all regions, with women earning about 33% less than men on average. In East Asia and the Pacific, it is slightly better, with women earning between 70 and 80% of what men earn for similar work. Meanwhile, South Korea has one of the largest gender wage gaps in the OECD, and I think a couple of speakers alluded to this earlier. According to the Global Wage Report of 2024, South Korea continues to have the largest pay gap amongst OECD countries, with women earning 31.2% less than men on average. And this means that those women only make about 68.8% of what men earn. So what explains the gender pay gap? Obviously, there's a whole confluence of issues. There's working hours, the time out in the workforce, education, opportunities for education, what we call feminized jobs. This should be the job for women. Women don't do these sorts of jobs. And there's also underrepresentation in leadership, which is actually really, really important as well. How do we do this at IFC? How do we look at this gender pay gap? So at IFC, we're increasingly working with our clients across all sectors to tackle the gender pay gap issue. And we're also working on this internally. We start by supporting our clients to conduct regular gender pay gap assessments and to address pay imbalances where they can't be explained by other factors. So this is factors such as experience, education, years in service, and so on. We also take very, very proactive pay gap controls and annual corrective measures at the IFC. First of all, I think the bands at which IFC pays employees are public, and they're public to everybody, including yourself. If you search, you could probably find it. But more than this, we also have an annual pay gap assessment. We use a regression analysis using data. And this data covers base salaries, bonuses, other cash benefits. And we are trying to see if there are any unexplained gender pay gaps, just like we do for our clients. And then what are the unexplained pay gaps? Again, we've said that if there is a difference or a gap in pay after accounting for things like, again, education, years in service, background, so on and so forth, where this sort of gap or unexplained issues can potentially affect staff salaries, what we do is that we take corrective action. And we do it proactively. And I have also done it proactively as a hiring manager, where I take that data to a human resources team, we discuss it, and using this methodology, we're able to actually make changes to people's pay gaps. We also continue to use feedback from HR, other hiring managers, and we revise salaries. We also revise the salary setting process from when people are appointed, sometimes even during the term of their appointments, as they're progressing, and also sometimes we made ad hoc salary increases. So we're very much on top of this. The second way is by parental leave benefits. When we allow secondary caregivers to take parental leave, it actually allows primary caregivers to come back into the workforce a lot earlier. We've seen this at IFC, where the majority of primary caregivers are actually women, and it allows them to re-enter the workforce a lot sooner than they could have, because a secondary caregiver is available to help them with caregiving activities. It also helps women reduce the likelihood of missing out on important career development opportunities, working on certain work streams that are associated with, once-in-a-lifetime events that actually bring women to the attention of decision makers at their institution. Situations such as the market downturn in 2008, the coronavirus pandemic, all these issues in the financial sector actually bring really opportunities for women to shine and to bring their best to work in solving problems and in helping prepare them for management in the next level. So our parental leave policies, with this in mind, they were updated in 2019, and they increased primary caregivers' parental leave from 70 to 100 days, and secondary caregivers' leave from 10 to 50 days. It may not be as generous as Canada, where I come from, where women routinely take up to 24 months away from their careers, sponsored in part by the government and their own financial institutions where they work, and that has really, really helped women to come back into the workforce in a meaningful way. So they're very, very strong drivers, business drivers for pay parity. And there's a lot of incentive for women to actually insist and for companies to address this gender pay gap. First of all, it will improve overall business performance, and most definitely, it definitely enhances the reputation of the firm. Absolutely does. Addressing these inequalities is also an essential part of the process of getting more women into leadership roles and ensuring women and men have an equal playing field. In South Asia, of course, I had said this before, the gender pay gap is the greatest of all regions, with women earning 33% less than men on average. So before I wrap up, what I would like to do is quickly touch on the work that the IFC has done on gender finance and gender advisory globally. You did see some of it in the video, but I think that some of the lessons in that video are very, very important, even though they may not apply to your day-to-day work, and you might serve a different segment and part of the financial markets. But definitely what it showed is that, when women are given a chance, they can truly, truly change the trajectory of their own lives as entrepreneurs, as leaders as well. There are also some solutions that are very specific for women. You saw some of the ladies who were in that video talk about, microloans. And so we created a structured solution to be able to have that bank that was also owned by a woman to originate and underwrite many more microloans, but also to risk manage those loans and to handle NPLs and to educate women. And so we've seen a complete difference in the lives of the women that we support, and also in the results of the bank. The bank is actually doing a lot more profitably because they decided to have very unique, tailored solutions for their very unique client base. So we do that in many different constructs. But what we've seen from widely available research is that there are pockets that need to be filled, and some of them are very profitable pockets as well. And we've increased our investments and our technical support to gender-specific programs across Asia and the Pacific. We estimate there's about a $1.5 trillion financing gap for women-owned SMEs, and we see a significant untapped market opportunity. Since 2012, we in the Financial Institutions Group have a program called Banking on Women, and that program has mobilized and invested over $7 billion in emerging markets financial institutions, and this is to finance both women and women-led MSME businesses. Of that $7 billion, about $4.6 billion is specifically set aside for women-owned SMEs. So through this program, we have worked with financial institutions across 76 countries to build profitable and sustainable financial services for women, and you saw some of that in the video that we showed earlier. Last October, on the advisory side, we have also launched a new partnership, and it's also on the investment side, with Shinhan Financial Group's microfinance subsidiary to extend credit to women entrepreneurs in Kazakhstan. We're also pushing a new initiative called Empower Finance, and we've started to work with 9 banks across Asia and the Pacific. We hope to reach about 30 million customers to help them address financial abuse. This program is really critical for ensuring financial inclusion and for the provision of safe and intended use of all financial products and services that are given out by our banks. So what we find is that closing persistent gender gaps, not only in pay, will increase women's overall economic participation and put more money in the hands of women. And when women have more money in their hands, it benefits their families and it also benefits their communities. So we've done some work with Shinhan Financial Group and other Korean institutions as they seek to follow their own subsidiaries into emerging markets. But we are very ready at IFC to help more financial institutions in Korea, and hope to help you in the transformative journey as you do a lot more work around inclusion and climate and sustainability. So in closing, what I would say is I seek you to encourage inspiration from other women in the room today. I'm sure if we had been here even 25 years ago, we wouldn't have had so many women leaders. So progress is coming, and this is really great to see. And so it's also good to hear people's stories, right? I really like storytelling, and that's why I actually began with telling a story. I like to tell my own story, because when you hear people's stories, they empower you, they help you to excel in your career and know what is actually possible. And it also helps you to elevate other people from your own position. So in any case, if you are seeking to look at some of the issues that we spoke about, or I spoke about in DEI and IFC's approach to DEI, you can look at our reporting. This is part of data-driven action. We're very transparent, and we report on our DEI results. You can see some of the issues I have addressed today in this report. Just kindly search for IFC DEI report online, and you will find our annual disclosures on gender inclusion, on pay equity, and other DEI measures. So with that, I would just like to say a huge, huge heartfelt thank you once more for inviting me to participate at this very, very important event. It's been such a pleasure to be here and to see that the work that is happening with women in finance in Korea, and I hope to be back again soon, many, many times. So thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.